Hello everybody, welcome to the podcast of Peculiar Adventures. Today we're going to be discussing accessibility in video games. I'm here with my co-host Ali.
Liberate Hong Kong.
I myself am Shane, and we have our guest today, Tora.
Hey!
Tora, would you like to tell everybody about yourself?
Sure. I am a trans woman. I use she, her pronouns, and liberate Hong Kong.
That is the stream. Today's stream is about Liberate Hong Kong.
Professional stress.
Brought to you by Activision Blizzard.
Excellent.
Hashtag Xbox.
Alright, so, first off, so we're talking about essentially, assisting people with disabilities into being able to play games more easily.
Yep.
And stuff like that. And the most obvious one that comes to mind is it's colorblind mode. Because colorblind mode is frequently in a lot of games. It's not in everything. A lot of people have issues defining colors, especially when that's like a very important part of the game, defining differences between what you're looking at. Colorblind mode is very important. Is there any examples of games that have a very, very good colorblind mode that you can think of?
Personally, I think Dota 2 has a fairly good colorblind mode. It changes the life bars and the team colors, so it makes it a little bit easier to pick out what's going on if you have troubles with certain greens or reds.
What do you mean like team colors? Are there colors around each character?
No, so that's referring to the fact that on the mini-map,
Yeah.
the different structures and everything are different colors.
Yeah, they're coded red or green depending on which side you're on.
Yeah, that's what they are in colorblind mode?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, they're red and... it's blue and greenish, I think, right?
I can't even... I think red and green is correct.
Is it red and green?
Yeah.
No, you're right. It is red and green. Cause
it might be turned into bluish with the colorblind mode.
Yeah, it's normally
I've never put it on before.
Yeah. I use it a couple times, but not often.
Is there any game that you can think of that doesn't have a colorblind mode or has a really shitty one?
Well, there are a lot of games that don't have colorblind modes that really should.
Throw a dart.
Throw a dart. Go into a GameStop, throw a dart.
Yeah, you hit one.
I'm trying to think of it. Most games I can think of are just... It feels like it's a trend for competitive, games to have colorblind mode lately, I feel. Because I can't think of any single-player experiences that...
Yeah, I don't think Sekiro had one, for example, and that's one of my most recent played.
Okay, so you think it's more prominent inside of multiplayer stuff because...
that's happened to be the trend, I think. Because when I think of games I include them, they're all, multiplayer focused, Fortnite and, those sorts of...
I think it's easier to, It's easier to deal with issues that you have with something instead of a single-player game because you're just doing, playing through the game instead of playing against other human players. So you don't feel like you're at a disadvantage against other people. You're just, struggling a little bit to get through the main game, but you're still getting the main game experience.
True.
Yeah, they should still have it, though.
I agree.
I'm surprised that, I can't think of any Nintendo games that actually have it. The only one that might... No, I don't want to say that in case I'm inaccurate. But I'm surprised that... Because Nintendo games tend to have, very vibrant color palettes, which I guess maybe the concessions are made in the design of what the palettes are to make it, accessible for a wide swath of gamers, including gamers with a color processing deficiency. Yeah, I'm surprised that I don't see those sorts of options in Mario Odyssey or something like that.
It's interesting because I think that strides are being made forward to try and make things more accessible specifically by third parties to make things more accessible for people who have physical disabilities and need alternate controllers and all sorts of stuff. There was the recent the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which is $100 to purchase, and that's a controller that's set up so that you can remap it comes with an app that you can remap everything, and you can make it so that essentially it fits what you need. And there are people who use foot pedals that are third party, but again, I guess the Xbox One isn't necessarily third party. That's directly from the company.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of third party different pieces of technology like foot pedals and stuff for people who don't really have the ability to use their hands quite as easily. It's definitely less common, I think, for games to take in for people who have visual issues or hearing issues and stuff like that. The biggest thing anybody does for something with hearing issues is subtitles.
Subtitles, yeah.
Yeah.
There's probably some more stuff that we could do, but I think subtitles is definitely a good starting point at the very least.
I cannot remember the last game I played that did not have the option for subtitles.
Yeah. The only thing I think I'd like to see expanded would be the option to make the subtitles bigger or reposition them.
Yeah.
Or at least change the font color, because sometimes they just blend into the background and it's almost
Yeah,
impossible.
I have run into that issue before where, like, it's like the subtitles are black and it'll just be, like, very dark image and I'm like, what the fuck does that say?
Yeah.
I
They
know
should
what
be
I'm looking at.
customizable. You should be able to, like, make the subtitles present in a way that you could see it depending on, your own eyesight situation.
No,
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons I stopped playing Dead Rising way back on the original 360.
Did it had not? What was the?
They were kind of yellow-ish.
Yeah.
And I
That
played
game
on
is very yellow.
Yeah, the whole palette for the game is very yellow, then the subtitles were yellow, and then on top of that, I was playing on a smaller screen with no resolution options, so it was just, I couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
Kind of leading into that, not just subtitles, but just options to change text size in general.
Yes.
I know there was a huge complaint with particularly Fire Emblem Three Houses, but it's been echoed across a couple different Switch games and other games that the text is too small in handheld mode.
Yes.
And also too small for some people in docked mode. So that's something that developers should be looking at, is making sure the text is... Like, I understand if you have a lot of information to present on a screen, you do need to make some choices to compacting it to make it all fit. But there should at least be an option to increase the font size to make it, better for everyone.
Yeah.
When it comes to the visual stuff, it's definitely... There's more strides that can be made to try and improve it, but at least, we're seeing a lot of these things implemented more in games.
Yes.
More frequently. So that's definitely good to see. And another thing is that, a resource that PC gamers have that console gamers don't is mods.
Yes.
Yeah.
The modding communities are very, very active in trying to resolve issues. From anything to, like, mods will make games easier.
Yeah.
Or mods will just make games, they'll improve the subtitles. It'll just be... Quality of life mods are very, very common.
Yes.
And very, very popular. If you look at a lot of mod pages on Steam, some of the most popular mods will literally just be quality of life changes.
Texture repackaged, HD upgrades for the already existing renders.
Removals of time wasters, quote unquote, where, like, you have lengthy cutscenes or stuff that they just take out of the game so you don't have to deal with it.
Or they
for,
at
like,
least
animations.
add a skip option or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, that's moving to one of the more controversial accessibility things for a lot of people, because there's a lot of people who are very obsessive over the idea of having a solid single difficulty. I like the idea of the developers having essentially a difficulty that they label as, like, hey, this is our ideal difficulty. But I don't think that should stop you from adding additional difficulty settings.
Absolutely not. There's no real argument against it. Most people will just say things like, well, get good, or, that it will hurt the game. But, like, honestly, how is it going to hurt the game? Like, realistically, what's going to change? You, as a player individually, can play on whatever difficulty you choose. If you don't want to play easy mode, you don't have to. So what's actually being hampered? You get to experience the game as you want. Why does it matter to you personally that someone else gets to experience the game they want?
Yeah, it's... because, like... growing up with Halo, that was always kind of the thing for me with Halo, was they had, eventually they started labeling it where it was heroic, the way the game was intended to be played, and that's, like, the way that they say it. They always offered all these difficulties, but they had the difficulty where that's where they designed the game to be played from. Because it's not even just making games easier. You can also make games harder,
yeah.
And a lot of the time that's literally just, like, to score points for yourself, or you're like, oh, I'm cool, I beat the game on high difficulty. Like, it's to test yourself, but what it comes down to is it tends to be when you play the difficulty at a higher level than the intention of the design, you just exploit it.
Yeah.
It's just searching out exploits and stuff. Like, even as a kid when I was playing through the Halo series, if you played Legendary difficulty, you just played it co-op. Mm-hmm. You had a friend who just stood there as a spawn point.
Yeah.
And then you just kept going and dying and coming back and dying.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so, like, in the end, it wasn't really more difficult in the sense of, the experience was, like, more challenging for you. It was just egregious.
Yeah.
And it was difficulty for the sake of just feeling like you got the brownie points of I beat game on hardest difficulty.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to defining what constitutes difficulty or at the very least what's acceptable difficulty. Because we've all played games where there's a boss and the boss is really cool and you play it on the hard mode and then all of a sudden it's got 40 times the normal health value and you're just sitting there going, man, I sure wish my bullets did more than 4 dinky points.
Yeah, your own damage values are usually halved in those sorts of difficulties.
Yeah, because in that, when they try to make it more difficult, all they really do is they just make it so that it's more attrition based.
Yeah.
They tweak the numbers, takes longer. Usually add more enemies spawns, or maybe are more stingent on, like, say, like bullet drops or other resource drops.
Yeah.
And then you have games where it doesn't actually matter, like BioShock. You can play on the hardest difficulty. Well, what does that do? It disables the Vita chambers. Okay. You can still club a Rosie to death and just respawn, like 10 feet back.
Yeah, I do like, interestingly enough, the new PvE modes inside of Gears of War 5 have, instead of having a quote-unquote, like, difficulty, they have this, like, meter that you go up on. It's like you select, add this, add this, add this, and it goes progressively until you get to the highest difficulty. And each PvE game you play does something different based on what you do. So, like, it's very popular in the, or it's very relevant in the hive, like the hive busting mode, the escape mode, where each difficulty is unique to the specific hive you're trying to play. So, the most recent one I was playing is where the baseline difficulty is that the first added difficulty level is there's an invincible big dude with a Gatling gun that just slow rolls behind you, and you just have to keep running from him because you can't kill him. That's the first additional difficulty thing they add. And then as you go, you can add, like, more invincible dudes that are just there and you have to avoid.
Oh, boy.
Double the health of the enemies, increase the enemy's damage, make it so there's less ammo for you to pick up. And eventually the highest difficulty, I think, is always considered to be Iron Man, which is if you die, you start from the beginning. You can't go back to, like, a quote-unquote checkpoint. I do like that, where they have, like, this defining thing where it's not just easy, normal, hard, very hard.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just, you're adding these more difficult things to this. And it changes based on which one you're playing. So that's really cool to me.
Yeah, I like progressive difficulty modifiers.
Yeah, but getting back to the accessibility of, like, lower difficulties, there are tons of people who legitimately can't play a game at the level that the average person can.
Yeah.
And they require a lower level of difficulty to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to have these, because, again, if the designers design the game from a standpoint of this is our design to difficulty and they state that to you, then I don't see an issue with other difficulty settings existing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they don't do that, there still isn't really, like, a bad thing to having those easier difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
Developers know that they want as many people to play their games as possible. They don't want to, like, nerf their own profits that they could get just by making a game that's too hard. Like, this isn't the arcade games where that's how you got money.
Yeah.
They want anyone who's, like, not a gamer to be able to pick up the game and enjoy it still. So that's why you need these sort of early, these easier difficulties. Like, this is a sentiment echoed by Kojima with advertising Death Stranding's new very easy mode, which, because Kojima's always wanted to be a filmmaker, and he makes this very clear on his Twitter and anything he's ever talked about.
Yeah.
And he's made a lot of, like, film industry and TV industry friends who he wants to be able to, like, here, this is what I made. It's not a movie, you need to actually play through this, but here's a way that you can experience this and get more people into it to see his work.
Yeah, because Kojima is coming from it from, like, an artistic perspective where, like, this is his art.
Yeah.
And he wants people to experience his art.
And that's true for all game developers. They're all artists making their own.
Yeah, and when you're playing a video game, that is, like, watching a video game is experiencing it in one way, but the intended way to experience this art form is playing it.
It's interactive.
Interacting it, yes. Yeah. And so making it so that as many people as possible can do that is very good. Now, I do like the idea of, like, creating a video game with the intention of, like, this is kind of the way that you intend for the general public to experience it. The generalization of, like, most people will experience it this way. This is ideal for them, but allowing the options of accessibility. Yeah, and there's games that are known for being difficult, and there's games that are known for being easy, I guess. I mean, Nintendo's known for a lot of their mainstay series being relatively easy. From a lot of people's perspectives.
I wouldn't say they're mainstay series, because those usually have, like, a medium difficulty level. Like, the ones I would classify as, like, easier are, like, the Kirby's and Yoshi. Maybe not necessarily Yoshi. At least some Yoshi games where meant to be the sort of easy platformer alternative.
Yeah, I played Yoshi's Story 64. That game
Yoshi's
was
Story is very easy. Kirby tends to be like they're very like kid friendly. Like this isn't a very hard like platforming challenge game. The challenge can often come in other ways, or they have difficulty options in the other way, where they have ways to make the game harder for people who want that sort of challenge in it. I would say on average they're like medium to higher difficulty.
But I would agree with your initial point. They are primarily designed and marketed toward children and young adults, so having something that they can easily get into without super complex mechanics is definitely a good enriching experience. You know, it builds coordination, dexterity. You can even, I don't know, shoehorn in education if you really gotta.
And they've tried.
They have.
I mean, yeah, there's tons of things that I learned from video games when I was younger,
Same.
but I don't know if it's necessarily always applicable to anything in my life.
I don't know, did you play Donkey Kong Jr. Math?
No, no, I didn't play Donkey Kong
I
Jr.
didn't,
Man.
but I did play Mario Teaches Typing, too.
Oh, God.
Shoutouts to Mavis Beacon and Mario.
Yeah. Was it actually made by Mavis Beacon?
No.
Oh.
Mario taught me how to live.
He did? And Luigi taught me history. Mario was missing, dang it.
Oh, I actually played Mario is Missing.
I don't know if I should say I'm sorry or...
I don't remember it. It's like a fever dream to me because at the time I was a child, so it was just a very strange, like, I have these memories of it, and it just, the repeated text of Mario is missing. I don't remember any of the game other than walking into a castle. I don't...
Yeah, that castle was ubiquitous.
So,
to say the
it's...
least.
I don't know. It's maybe it's childhood trauma. Maybe I'm holding it in.
Can you imagine Mario was missing with the Luigi's Mansion? Mario!
I think that's only better than Mario Missing.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, and it's different, I think, obviously, when you get to multiplayer stuff. Because
Yes.
multiplayer stuff, you can't really control
Yeah.
the difficulty because that's entirely matching people up based on skill level and all that kind of thing. But, again, that then, with multiplayer, that comes down to making it so that the game can be played at the same level for a person who has disabilities to a person who doesn't.
Right.
And so that's why you have, things that are designed for people who have, limited mobility, stuff like cerebral palsy and like spinal cord injuries, and that's for the physical stuff where they have stuff that's called like a switch.
Yes.
And they use that to utilize the additional accessibility of, putting buttons in alternate places.
Yeah.
So they can use alternate parts of their body to utilize stuff. But then you also have people like Broly Legs who just overcome the issues they have, and they just use the same controls as everybody else does, but they've learned to use them in a different way. Because Broly Legs primarily uses their face to play Street Fighter predominantly. And they're very successful at it.
Yeah.
And then there's a speedrunner. Ali, I know that you know about this person. What was their name?
Half Coordinated?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
a good
believe
name.
Yeah.
Is it that they have only one arm?
No, I forget the name of the disease he had, or the disability he has, but he can't move his, I believe it's his right hand as much as his left. So he plays games predominantly with only his left hand.
Southpaw.
And he speedruns at a very high level with it. Like, I remember first learning about him from AGDQ, it was either 2017, or maybe it was SGD. No, it was AGDQ, I'm pretty sure, where he played Nier Automata Route A speedrun in about, oh no, I can't remember. It's like an hour and a half-ish.
It's impressive.
Yeah, and he played at a very high level. Like, Nier Automata is a character action game, like, is the main physics about
It's a platinum game, right?
Yeah, it's a platinum game.
Okay.
It's a bit more RPG, but it's still at its core a platinum game.
Okay.
And him being able to play that one-handed
It's
is
impressive.
incredible.
Yeah.
And he's done a lot of other games since then. And now he works primarily as a speedrunner and an accessibility consultant. So he, if a game developer like contracts him, he'll lend his thoughts on how concessions that can be made in the game design to make it more accessible to people with disabilities.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, that also brings up one of the probably the earliest thing I thought about when I was younger when it comes to accessibility is one of my best friends when growing up was left-handed. And my mother is left-handed. And so when it came to, I think it was about the time that the Nintendo Wii came out, my friend started complaining about like how awkward it was to do certain things with the Wii left-handed. And I didn't really think about that before then. Like, I didn't really think it... The only reason I would think about it was because he would switch to Southpaw controls for Halo, and he would change his controls. But that's one of the oldest things that, accessibility exists for, is for people who predominantly, primarily use their left hand. I've been seeing games for a long time include southpaw alternate controls, but I think, honestly, most games should just include altogether button remapping.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't really see an issue with it. I suppose there could be the idea of having button remapping allowing you to abuse it for competitive settings.
You only see that you can design around that because most of the time that happens due to a way the game is coded. I know Celeste, I'm not sure if it still exists in the game, but if you mapped dash to two different inputs, you can get a slightly different dash if you do the two inputs right after each other. Mm-hmm. That gets you slightly further than normal. But either that's been patched out or people just don't use it enough anymore because the rules in the run changed. But a designer could easily prevent that by having just a way in their system to make sure, if this input happens twice in a frame, then just ignore the second input.
Yeah, and plus, if you're on PC, most people can get alternative programs to try and remap everything. But I think that's just kind of something that should be included in most things because, again, for anything from being left-handed to just only having the major accessibility of a primary hand, or even having to use alternative resources, button remapping is super important, and that's one of the best things to include people, is to allow them to control the game the way they want to. And then, you don't have to worry quite as much about your primary control scheme fitting everybody.
Yeah.
Because there are times where you switch between games, you go from one game to another, and the difference in what button does what is super jarring and super obnoxious for you to get really, just used to.
That's why I didn't play when Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn came out at very close to each other, and I had to put Breath of the Wild on hold for a while because it had an opposite control for shooting arrows than Horizon did, and I was so used to Horizon having played that for the 3 weeks leading up to Breath of the Wild's launch that I just had to put it down because Nintendo games typically are, they don't offer button remapping. Sort of for a reason you said, Nintendo likes to design, in their mind they want to design a perfect button layout that
for everyone
which good in theory, but
not in practice.
I think that's a very outdated philosophy.
I agree.
Because you need to be able to make concessions to people who just can't make it work with the normal button scheme.
Yeah.
They have Breath of the Wild has a slight button remapping where you can just swap where the jump button is, because by default it's kind of an awkward place. X is the jump button, which is the topmost button on the.
Yeah.
you can only switch X and B around
because
they're the opposites, and that's the only button remapping that at least it offered when I played. Mm-hmm. There's a chance that it has button remapping now, but I think it's a slight chance given how Nintendo is usually the most rigid about offering button remapping as an option. But they should embrace button remapping.
Yeah, I because I play a lot of my stuff on PC. Most things have, rebinding the keys because it's pretty important. And from somebody who likes to play, I've enjoyed playing RTSs and strategy games, and I like to play Dota. Button mapping is super important.
Very, very.
Because of just control groups are really important. Having it so that you can easily access everything readily.
Your ability to use your items.
Yeah, in a PvP environment, you want to be able to use something immediately upon the time when you want to. Yeah. So. And alternate options for controls, too, anything from, inside of a MOBA, you might have it where, normally you'd have to click the button and then left-click, but you can change the settings so that if you just click the button wherever your cursor is hovering, it'll happen there. Yeah, and so that's a really nice option that's given to people that really just want to lower the amount of things that they have to do in order to make an action happen. So I think controls are one of the biggest things when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah, and it also just benefits everyone. I mean, wouldn't you want to be able to enjoy the game the best way you can? There's no reason to not be able to include button remapping. I have some difficulty sometimes with the default button layout. I switch them around, like Mortal Kombat, for example. Fighting games. Some of them have the L1 or L2 as grab, and some people find it more comfortable for R1 or R2. It's just it benefits everyone, and I sure wish that you could remap buttons in Left 4 Dead, because I remember playing Left 4 Dead at the same time I was playing Rainbow Six 2, and let me tell you, B in Left 4 Dead was reload. B in Rainbow Six was a grenade.
It's a similar concept.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, when you get to that accidental point where you're like...
Kill an entire team.
Yeah,
Oops.
you're doing accidental shit because you're like, oh, fuck, that was... Because you're going between games and you're trying to do this action that you're so used to doing in another game. You're literally just mentally associating the two.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or even just muscle memory, not even thinking about it.
Especially if you play them one right after the other. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've died thinking I reloaded my gun and just stepped on a grenade.
Yeah, and also a lot of fighting games like to do... even button remapping can bring somebody back to what they're used to in, like, different controls. So, like, the arcade player, when they're playing a fighting game, might want it so that you press 2 buttons to grab.
Yeah.
Instead of having a specific designated button, it's just a similar input to what it used to be on an arcade stick.
Or just having the toggleable option to have alternative controls on, like you said. You can have L1, or you can do the 2-button grab layout. You could have the 1-button super, or you can press all 3 punches or kicks for your ultra, super, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that there's always the argument, and it's always going to exist, because there's the extent of, well, if it's not difficult to input, then there's, like, a low skill to get into it, and everybody's going to use it and that kind of thing. And I guess I can see that with fighting games to a certain extent.
I don't really see it. Like, I agree there needs to be skill, but I don't think the skill should be like the manual skill to that extent. Like, sure, it should have a special input, like, say, making it like a Hadoken or Shoryu motion rather than, say, if it's some complex thing like the pretzel on pieces.
Good old Deadly Storm.
Yeah. But I don't think that's where the skill should come in. I think the skill should come in actually like playing the game,
learning
and,
the
like,
mechanics,
and having that in learning the mechanics, less than the manual. Like, you should try to lower the manual like barrier to entry. I feel.
Yeah, it's like on the one hand I can kind of see that, but the thing I've noticed, especially like watching professional games and fighting games specifically develop, is that even if you do make something easier, the people who are really good at it will still do it the most optimal way.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes making it easier is actually less optimal. Because there's some cases where, like, Tiger kneeing a certain input makes it easier to do it off the ground. And, yeah, you could simplify the input, but maybe that actual specific motion leads into a different aspect of your combo route easier. So there's no reason to use the other motion. It's just going to make it more harder for you to input.
Yeah, I think that controls on, like, changing up how they are inside of a fighting game is a pretty big topic.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know the FGC.
Yeah, there's the barrier to entry idea, and it's interesting too because I think it's Ed inside of Street Fighter 5 who's so weird because he doesn't have standard Street Fighter inputs.
Don't you have to like hold the button, like the actual like attack button or something?
Yeah, it's just like forward, and that's one of his specials. So his fireball is like a forward punch, and then if you hit it again, he punches the fireball and it shoots.
That's cool.
Yeah, so he's really weird because he's so different in how he's controlled, and that's the kind of thing where they're using the way that the characters control and their inputs to variate them, as opposed to, and that would lead them to not want you to be able to remap how you do things like that because that's how they feel they variate the characters. So it's definitely. You're going to run into a lot of people who are not going to want the ability to simplify inputs for fighting games because they believe it's a barrier to entry and part of the skill and part of the experience. And so they really want that to maintain and be there. They believe it's like a landmark part of the franchises that they're part of.
It can be difficult to implement like accessibility that accommodates the wants of all these different groups that have sometimes disparate interests, but I think it's worth it to at least try to explore these avenues, such that if you do it well, it's going to pay off very well in making a lot of people happy, and that's ultimately what developers should like
strive
to do.
Yeah, and of course, like there's always the argument of there's a lot of people like small communities. A lot of people like things that feel like they're
like insular,
inaccessible because they like the idea of having this barrier to entry and having this exclusives club.
All I can say is grow up.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of developers are really not going to want that because again, you want your game to be as successful as you possibly can. You want as many people to enjoy it as possible.
Imagine being a developer and then making a game for 3 people and having to go out of business because you couldn't pay your bills. Yeah, you sure did it, buddy. Proud of you.
So the left-handed thing that was a big thing, and I don't know if do they make left-handed controllers.
I think so, but I haven't.
I have
done,
not seen
looked
one.
in
I have not seen one recently, nor have I even seen, like, at least in the games I've played, concessions for, like, left-handed, like a left-handed control scheme mode. Not since, like, the GameCube days.
I don't know if there's any official ones, but I know there's a bunch of different custom controller sites where you could probably have things swapped around, and then it'll cost you a small fortune. But
yeah, custom controllers are a huge way to make games accessible to people who are physically unable to play certain games. Like I've seen the kinds of different controllers they made, like just 2 weeks ago or so at GDQX that they held during TwitchCon. There was a runner who she played Tetris Attack with a special controller. She had similarly to half coordinated issues in her left hand due to various medical procedures that left her only able to play with her right hand, and she had a custom controller that allowed her to play Tetris Attack on it, and was able to speedrun at a high level on the highest difficulty. And the charity that they actually worked for that time for that event was the Abled Gamers, which is a charity that's trying to give or help finance these expensive, because these options are expensive.
they're very expensive.
To help finance these options for disabled gamers and let them be included in the gamer space.
Yeah, because that's an interesting fact, because I know that there are competitions that they will not allow specific custom controllers.
Yeah.
They will not allow the usage of alternative options to play. You have to use the specifically designated, competitive controller style. I'm curious if that, I understand that that's supposed to be to try and, even the playing field and make sure everybody is playing off of the same thing, but it definitely doesn't allow for the, inclusion of people who are, have to use that kind of controller and aren't looking to abuse it. They're just looking to play the game.
I feel like they're probably made carefully enough at that price point that they can be very careful to make sure they don't have a different experience from the normal controller input out.
Or at the very least, some type of standard quality control or something. Or at the very least, just expressly saying this hasn't been tampered with, or just having someone inspect the controller for any faults or modifications.
Yeah,
I'm sure that wouldn't be too difficult to run through.
Yeah, I don't go to a lot of competitions, so I don't really know the standard things that they apply to them and who they allow to use alternate controllers and stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe you have to register it and try and get it through inspection and stuff like that before you can, or maybe they just don't allow it at all.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on the competition too.
Well, yeah, for sure. Is there any games you can think of that really impress you with how accessible their options are?
Spider-Man. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking, but it has selectable difficulty for the main story and the fighting controls, so you can kind of customize your experience. It's got variable font size, and I think a scaling HUD as well. It's got a colorblind mode. It's got a bunch of different tweaks that you can just personalize the experience so that you enjoy playing it. The point of the game is to be Spider-Man. Would kind of suck if you can't Spider-Man.
Yeah. What's the official title of the game?
Of the game? Just Spider-Man.
I think it's Marvel's Spider-Man.
Marvel's Spider-Man, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was defined by its release year.
No,
people usually do that for games with similar names.
Yeah.
But I think it's also the only one with Marvel's in the title, so it's pretty easy to find.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, is there anything that you can think of that's particularly accessible, has a lot of options for that?
I think a good one is, and you've kind of been seeing this in some games nowadays, it's becoming a trend of assist modes in games that allow you to change the various parameters, kind of like what you were saying that Spider-Man allows you to do. I've seen a couple games formally call it assist mode. I'm not sure if it's going by other names in some games. I know Mario Odyssey actually has one that allowed my little cousin to pretty much play through the whole game and get most of the moons with just some pretty simple options that just allowed him to have a lot more fun with the game than he would have if he was, stuck to the normal health values and normal difficulties of the game. And then Celeste has a really good one as well, because Celeste is a hard game. It's meant to be hard, and the developers intended that, but they also know that they also want people to be able to play it regardless of your skill level. And at first assist mode had some problems where the messages it had when you turn on assist mode, the game tracks your progress with a a little card on your save file, and when you assist mode it used to stamp it, which some people took as like delegitimizing your save file by just if you turn on assist mode once. A similar sort of problem occurred with New Super Mario Bros. On the Wii, which was, I think, one of the second games that I remember having Nintendo's Super Guide feature, which is if you die more than 7 times in a level, a block would appear at the beginning that would play the level for you. But if you ever had a Super Guide spawn during your playthrough, throughout the game you would get stars on your save file, but if you got a Super Guide on any level, your stars would dim, and they wouldn't, like, sparkle anymore. Some people took as, like, again, like, delegitimizing the save file, making it less than, like, a perfect save file would be. So Celeste actually took this, these criticisms that people like half-coordinated and other disabled gamers to heart, and they not only changed the messaging on it. Before, it used to say, if you weren't playing on if you turn on assist mode, you weren't playing exactly as the developers intended, and now it's worded that, now it's worded exactly as this. Celeste is intended to be a challenging and rewarding experience. If the default game proves inaccessible to you, we hope that you can still find that experience with assist mode. That's what it was changed to after, feedback from people like Half Coordinated. Catherine Elaine Jones were the two people who really like got on this like Twitter thread about it and talked to Matt and the rest of the Celeste team about it, which is really good. And assist mode, specifically what it does is it turns on options like invincibility while dashing, more dashes than just the normal like one. You could do like infinite dashes, you could do a set number. It's super customizable, so you can still make it a hard experience if you want. Just maybe your issue is that you can't, because every level has like an intended solution, but if you can't find it, or you're having some trouble due to it being a very hard like manual input to do, you can still make your way through the game. And the game's all about, traversing challenges.
One thing that's existed inside of a lot of shooters, is specifically on console for a long time, is aim assist.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where it was so integral to a lot of shooters early on that a lot of people didn't even realize it existed.
Yeah.
Like, they thought that they were just good at aiming, or like they're better at aiming than they thought they were. And they realized that aim assist existed. And I think a lot of people attribute it to be like, especially if you have a cross-platform game, aim assist is supposed to make up for the differences between using a controller and using a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because it doesn't necessarily feel like an accessibility thing for people who have an issue with aiming. It's just kind of a universal thing to make it easier as a whole. But they also have the option to turn it on and off.
Yeah.
And whether or not you'd argue that the game is like, it takes away skill to the player to have aim assist on, it's still always consistently been able to be turned off.
Yeah.
So like if people cared that much about a competitive level and they said like, oh hey, you have to have aim assist off.
It could also be disorienting, isn't it? Because I know some implementations of aim assist do sort of like, they aren't fast necessarily. Like if you mouse over someone and say you missed their head is what you were aiming for, and then you sort of like slowly move back rather than.
I think what it is it makes it so that when you're aiming and you eventually get your crosshair over a target, it slows how quickly you can move off the target.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it makes it so that like your movement is harder to do away from the target than it is to like get there. So you'll move faster when you're aiming towards it, but once you're aiming at it, it'll try to focus it onto it. And that's interesting because again, I started off playing a lot of console shooters before I got into PC gaming, and I never even knew aim assist existed.
Yeah.
Until very late into me playing a lot of console shooters. One game that kind of bakes accessibility into its game, and this has been happening with some games more recently. Overwatch is one of those games where you'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, it's not a shooter because it's very specifically pulls a lot from MOBAs and other games, and it's very similar to TF2, although I don't hear people say TF2 isn't a shooter. It's because Overwatch specifically has a lot of characters that are designed that you can play them without being good at aiming. So like a lot of the support characters who don't really have a gun, you don't need to be good at aiming. You don't need to be able to aim. You can play this character and you succeed by just knowing what you're doing, and like other forms of game knowledge. And so like the core of the game isn't necessarily being good at aiming. And because of that, a lot of people discredit it as a shooter for that reason. Because they don't, to them, shooter is aiming, gun, and shooting. And not, I'm playing as a character who has a giant hammer. And the only range attack I have is like a long cooldown range nuke. And so that's an interesting form of accessibility to me, where to get more people to play the game, they have the idea of, I guess I'm not even really going to say entry-level characters, they're really not, but it's a way to get other people into a genre they're not used to by giving them more familiar things. And I know that the new Gears of War game also has the Jackbot, where you are essentially just playing as this little drone robot, and your job is to heal your allies, like sometimes, stun enemies and stuff, but you don't aim and shoot a gun. So this character is designed to allow people who aren't used to shooters, who aren't used to these things, to play and not feel like they're useless. And it also goes along the lines of even new modes they have in that game, because they understood that they were going to release it on Xbox Game Pass, which means tons of people who have never played the franchise before are going to play this game. Because they're going to go, oh, it's free on Game Pass, I'll try it out.
Right.
And so they created the arcade game mode, which is, it limits the amount of wall bouncing you can do, which is an important part of competitive play. And it also doesn't start you with the standard, I think it's none of the characters that you start with an Asher shotgun. Because a big core of that game's multiplayer competitively is the shotgun. Like, most of the time when professional players are killing each other, it's with the shotgun. They wanted to make the game feel more similar to other shooters and other genres by letting people explore the game in this game mode, where not everybody has a shotgun, not everybody's cover bouncing and everything, and it's not like overwhelming you with all this weird new stuff that you're not used to when you're already not used to playing a cover shooter.
Right.
And so they built into their design philosophy accessibility, not necessarily by adding options, but by adding, unique game modes and unique ways to play.
Yeah, I'm really a fan of that, especially the arcade mode. Because, I mean, if you think, a bunch of new players are going to experience the game, which is what you want as a developer. You want more people to come in, play the game, become enamored with your franchise, and now you have supporters for the next time you release either a new IP or a sequel. That's what you want. So having them find some amount of comfort in either familiarity or just something that isn't going to immediately throw them out because it's too over complex or something like that, that just gives you... It makes it so, like, even as like a longtime player, you might find a new thing that you like about a franchise. Like, imagine if they had something similar to that, but like in, say, Counter-Strike or something. You've never played a shooter before, and everyone has the same guns and everything, but you make this like spectacular game mode that everyone really enjoys, and all of a sudden you got a bunch of new renewed interest in the game. I think that personally is just really cool. I've always been a fan of new game modes, especially like Halo 3 with the custom game modes like Glitchball and stuff. It makes it more fun than just kind of standard team deathmatch.
Yeah, and there's tons of people who exclusively play games for the PvE modes.
Yeah.
There's people who play the Call of Duty franchise, they've been playing the Gears of War franchise, and it's the reason why Halo eventually tried to adopt in survival modes as well. Mm-hmm. People just like PvE elements. And some people, they would come to play those games for the campaign.
Yeah.
They would play a Halo game for the campaign, and then they would just be done.
Yeah,
they didn't care to play versus. And so when you add these PvE modes, it kind of adds more content for somebody to play the game, to experience the game that isn't necessarily the competitive environment that they don't want to be a part of. That's cool because, again, game modes are super, super nice for that, and I've been seeing more people kind of try to emphasize that. And there was a period of time where a lot of shooters were just getting released where it's like, it's multiplayer only.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of content to be had to anyone who didn't want to play the versus modes. And I've even seeing fighting games do that more.
Yeah, they're really... Mortal Kombat's a big proponent. They've been retooling the story mode. It's honestly quite a wonderful cinematic experience. The writing has gotten better. The character animations and the pre-rendered cutscenes has gotten a lot better. The lip syncing has gotten a lot better. It almost feels like you're watching like a AAA campaign story mode sometimes. Yeah,
and you're also having these like almost event-based things where they have the challenge. They really emphasize the challenge towers because they know a lot of people who play the game don't put the time in to really get good at it.
Yeah.
At least from a competitive standpoint, and so these are people who just want to play arcade style modes. They just want to play the by themselves type gameplay, and they want those people to stick around. They want those people to buy their game, and they want them to buy future games, and so they're working really hard to make it so that the people who just want the single player experience don't feel like because it's a fighting game they can't experience it.
Yeah.
Which, that's the issue Street Fighter V had on release, because its release was literally, here's the verses. That's the game.
Yeah.
Full price.
Full price, go ahead.
And eventually they added a story mode and they tried to add more stuff. They had an arcade mode on release, I think, but it was pretty short, flimsy arcade mode and not a whole lot of content. And that was one of the biggest complaints about that game, was that it released unfinished.
Yeah, I mean that's
it
kind
really
of
colored the perception of that game on launch.
Yeah, to this day, there's still a lot of people who have not even looked back at it because they just saw it on launch and they're like, well, I don't want to deal with that. That's some bullshit.
Yeah, I admit I was one of those people. I didn't want to pay full price for half a product. My money is limited. I have to buy games that I'm going to be playing for a while, and if all I have is versus mode in a game that I suck at in an arcade mode you can blow out in like 30 minutes with a character, what more do I got?
In that moment, they were last generation Capcom, releasing unfinished games at full price.
Rookie mistake.
I remember when Mortal Kombat was trying to do that thing where they were like, oh, I know, fighting games are competitive and hard to play, so let's make it so that the single player mode is an action adventure game that occasionally makes you fight.
Yeah.
But most of it's an action adventure game, and it's like, I'm not playing Mortal Kombat to play a half-baked action adventure game.
Leave Conquest mode alone, man. I liked Conquest mode.
So when I was a kid, I thought it was fun and interesting, but I understand why they deviated from it. Again, that's the funny thing about the new Crypt they had in the newest game, was everybody's like, oh, is it Conquest mode? And it's like
kinda.
It's kind of like Conquest mode if Conquest mode had no combat at all.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can smack spiders.
Yeah, you have that hammer
that infinitely respawn and kill you when you're trying to look at a chest. Okay.
Yeah, that's But it tried to pack itself, and that's the thing is when a lot of games are releasing almost half finished and trying to do this idea of, oh, more content, we're going to keep updating content, you have to convince people that it's worth buying.
Yeah. It's
worth getting. Now, if it's a free-to-play game, then it's a different thing because, that's how they work. Free-to-play games are literally try this game out. We'll keep shelling out content and that kind of stuff. But if you're paying a price tag for something, you want to feel like it's worth the money you paid on release. You don't want to feel like you have to wait to get the additional content. And then tons of times it's behind a paywall anyways. So
Star Wars The Old Republic.
Yeah.
Before that, I played that game on launch. Well, first off, I was a beta tester. And one of the reasons that game failed is they fixed very few of the bugs that were present in beta. Things that were constantly reported over and over remained unfixed in the finished product. So, that's strike one. Two, there was no in-game content. The whole point was that it was this big cinematic story experience that is like Knights of the Old Republic 3. That's what you guys wanted. But now you can play online with friends. Okay, that's cool. You get through your reasonably challenged story mode. You hit halfway to max level, or if not max level. And then, I guess you get PvP, or you can go to the PvP planet in PvP. Or you can go to the PvP planet and not PvP and then die in PvP. Because, it's Star Wars, so the factions are inherently unbalanced because either you play on the Empire server or you play on the Alliance server, and you pick the wrong faction no matter what you did. Either you were on the prominent faction and you got to kill nobody because everyone was already dead and respawning, or you were on the underpowered faction and you were always dead and respawning.
Yeah, I've never really been one to play MMOs, so I don't really know about,
It's a problem sometimes. And another problem is that it was... you had to buy the game. It was $60 for the game, and then it was a subscription, $15 a month or whatever. So you've already shelled out $75 on top of your internet cost that you're paying per month to have a game that you finish in a week that it wants you to keep playing with no real end. You just keep playing it. They give you more stuff. But it takes, months to release new content. There hadn't been an expansion yet. You finish the game in 2 weeks and you're like, wow, that was a good usage of $75. Sure glad that I did that.
Yeah.
Sab.
Yeah, you've got to keep people playing stuff like that and keep them with interest in doing it.
Pokemon Masters, the mobile game's doing that right now. There's no in-game content.
Oh.
You blow through the single-player mode, and then it's on the one hand, it's fine, because they advertise it as a co-op game experience, which is, it's whatever, but there's very little single-player content. There's like 18 chapters. It doesn't even finish the story mode. You get to the end of the story mode, and it's like, the story mode will be continued. And you're like...
You don't even have like a timeline on when the story
mode,
yeah.
It could be tomorrow, it could be next year, it could be never.
Yeah, speaking of Knights of the Old Republic, that makes me think about games like to give you the option of like a pause.
Yes.
Where you have this ability to kind of stop and absorb everything that's happening and really figure something out. It's really popular in RPGs.
Oh yeah.
Even non-turn-based ones. Like I was just playing Indivisible. In Indivisible, you have a freeze function where you can just freeze everything and kind of gather what you want to do. And it's an action RPG because everything is like timed and cooldowned, but you're still telling people what to do in real time. It's telling your characters what to do in real time instead of turn-based where, it just goes, all right, it's your turn. All right, they do something. And so the pause function in that game, I was kind of surprised to come by it. I wasn't really expecting it. I was like, oh, I can just pause this. But it reminds me of stuff like Mass Effect or like the old BioWare games where you could just pause and kind of like collect yourself and figure out what's going on. And that is definitely a form of accessibility because there are people that are going to take time to process that kind of information, and it's not necessarily going to punish you super heavily for not being able to like quick think immediately on what you need to do and make like immediate rash choices. So that was a cool thing when playing through Indivisible that I haven't really used it too much, but I definitely have like kind of taken moments to be like, wait, I don't know what this person's attack does. Maybe I should try this.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't pay enough attention when it was telling me how this works.
Yeah, I kind of wish more games had that.
Because the Total Warhammer also has that.
Oh, cool.
Where you can pause in the middle of a battle, and that's like a real-time strategy game where you have real-time battles, but you can just pause and make commands while it's paused. Like it's like the Knights of the Old Republic thing where you have a freeze frame and then you just choose what happens next, and then all of it proceeds to go. And I like to not use it inside of Total Warhammer because I like to challenge myself to be in the real time, but I appreciate that the option's there.
Yeah.
And that people have that option. Obviously, when you're playing PvP, it doesn't exist. Right. That's because that would be super annoying if people could just freeze frequently inside of PvP games.
I would scream.
And, like, not to say that pause functions in PvP aren't good. I do like that Dota has a pause function.
Oh, I love that it has that.
Because a lot of the time, I've had issues where somebody disconnects and we pause, and, like, half the time everybody is like, okay, that's fine, we'll wait a little bit for them to get back. We don't want to just win because somebody disconnected for a while, and we don't want somebody to get abandoned because they, their internet screwed off for a second.
Yeah.
But then you have the people that are like, no, I don't have time for this.
Unpause.
I don't have time for this. And
Pause.
It's like, bro, you set aside like you guaranteed knew this was going to take like an hour.
Minimum.
How does the pause work?
Everyone gets paused.
No, what happens is
one person initiates and anyone else can uninitiate.
Anyone else,
okay.
yeah. So essentially, what happens is you can pause. You're limited. You can't pause again after it's been done for a period of time. But also, after you force an unpause, there's a period of time where you can't force an unpause again.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the idea isn't like one person can't prevent every other person on the enemy team from pausing, but two people can because they can keep switching off.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, but that game has an all chat for you to type in and be like, hey, this. And that's pretty much the only real reason I see for all chats inside of games like that. I mean, you have the all chat for
BM.
for BMing and stuff, and I don't mind it, but also I don't have a problem when it's not there. I know Heroes of the Storm just didn't have an all chat. Smite doesn't have one, I don't think.
Well, look, they're both dead.
I've been literally PM'd in Smite by somebody. Yeah, it was like a dude where he was playing like a super oppressive character, and I just kind of had to sit under my tower because he would just kill me if I didn't. And then he's just like, well, this is boring. And I'm like, you picked that character. I don't know what you want from me. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not throwing my fucking corpse at you and just giving you this game. But, yeah, so obviously it exists for PMing, and people will BMing. And people will find a way to, mess with people regardless. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why taunts are in games. They're super popular.
Pretty much.
But
People will buy taunts.
people spend money on that. But it's literally a situation of, I like that the all chat exists simultaneously with the pause function, so you can try and make sure that people aren't screwed over because some mishap happened. It takes them a couple minutes to resolve. Yeah, I mean, obviously it exists within private matches in a lot of games and with professional matches where they'll pause stuff because they're like, hey, this person's keyboard is having problems. We need to resolve this.
Down, something like that.
Yeah.
We're
and
having
so
technical difficulties.
they'll have pause like that, but inside of a PvP game, the only game I can think of that had a pause function that has a pause function is Dota.
Yeah, that's what the only one
I mean, it makes sense because like in Dota, it's 5v5. It's a small group of people, and it's a very long game. So it's not like this thing where you invest 5 minutes to do a game and somebody pauses in the middle of this 5-minute match and you're like, dude, just let it end and move on.
Yeah.
but,
It's like, at this point, with the amount of characters, items, and just different team comps, it pretty much is minimum an hour. I've pretty gone are the days of the quick 30-minute match.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, Dota also does have a surrender function.
Yeah.
So you got to deal with it. You got to play it through. Unless somebody abandons, and then everybody can leave.
Yeah. Or you could just be the one and take that abandon, but then you risk low prio.
Yeah.
We don't want to be in the dumpsters.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's also, I guess, there's a big issue within PvP communities where new players and people who aren't particularly good at the game get, like, absolutely berated.
Yeah.
Because people do not want... It's specifically team games.
Yeah.
People do not want bad players on their teams. And that's kind of really why, ranking and divisions exist.
But then people keep making alt accounts, so...
Yeah, Smurfs and alt accounts exist, which kind of mess with that, but... it's the idea that you want a place for everybody.
Yeah.
That's why ranked modes really exist. I mean, they existed initially because people wanted to feel good and wanted to feel like, hey, I'm this rank, I'm really good, but...
I'm the top-rated Tide Hunter on my
It
server.
is very good to have those sort of different cues just to sort of make the experience for what people want. If you want to play a casual game with people, you can go in a casual queue, or if you want to have serious mode, you can have the serious queues.
Yeah, and that's accessibility for, like, people who want to play competitively or people who just really don't want to play competitively.
Yeah.
And I've run into people, like, I've been with people where they're like, it's like, oh, we're playing ranked, and they're like, yeah, I only ever play ranked. They, like, refuse to play not ranked. They're like, what's the point of not playing ranked? I'm like,
fun?
having a good time. I'm like, I don't care about my rank in this game, I just want to play the game. Like,
surprise, video games are supposed to be fun?
That's a hot take.
Whoa,
that's a spicy one.
Yeah, we're getting zesty in here.
So, are there any other examples of accessibility that you really wanted to bring up?
One that I just thought about, back to Spider-Man again, is it has automated QuickTime, so you don't have to sit there and do the QTE events, which no one, I don't really know anyone who likes QTEs. This just kind of, we did it, it worked, people were like, whatever, so we'd still do them, but just imagine, like, having, cognitively reduced functionality because of, like, a brain injury or having a dissociative disorder or something where you physically don't have the reaction speed to do the inputs. And then, of course, they eventually get harder, and by harder, I mean faster. So it'll come a point where you just can't. You just can't. And if that's an important event, then, you just don't get to finish the game, and... I guess
I have friends that have literally broken controllers because of Mario Party and games that require the like slam and smash your button as fast as possible. Yeah. And it's interesting when it comes from like a player versus player point of view, because then it's like, well, you can't really
you can't really
do an alternative because that's literally what the gameplay is smacking the button as fast as possible. Gears of War has that with the chainsaw duels, where when you get in a chainsaw duel, whoever smashes their button faster wins.
Oh, old DBZ Tenkaichi, the fucking Beam Wars.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily a fan of the whole, like, smash your button as fast as possible, because it's like, I understand why it's there, but it just kind of feels...
Yeah, I feel like there's maybe some alternative system we can come up with, but it's like, when I was a kid, that was fine, I guess, but, I'm getting carpal tunnel. I'm 27. My arms hurt.
Well, now anytime something like that comes across, I always have to get some sort of physical implement, because I can't be bothered to just...
Yes.
It actually hurts my neck a lot.
Yes.
If I want to... Because the position that I have to do, I have to, like, lock my arm and then
just
vibrate my arm back and forth.
It's not...
Now I
not
just
fun.
grab a stylus and just try to, like, tap it as fast as possible.
That was a strat for Metal Gear Solid 1. Did you know that?
For what?
For the torture scene, you had to spam press circle in order to not submit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because in Deep Rock Galactic,
I always wanted to play that game.
if you get frozen, you have to smash like the both directional movements to try and get out of that. I don't mind that too much because that's kind of just like hey, do this input to get out, and that's
fine.
That's okay because it doesn't feel like I'm like breaking my hand to do it, and it doesn't happen frequently enough.
My bones are fragile.
Yeah. But it's definitely like in a player versus player environment. It's a really weird mechanic to have just this slamming of your key or your button to try and get
it makes
this
sense
faster.
in like only Mario Party and not really anything else.
Yeah, and that's because Mario Party is just silly.
Yeah, and even then they could probably figure out like an alternate control scheme that's toggleable for individual mini games. Or
if you waggle faster.
If you waggle faster, or I don't know, just give me the option to opt out. I'll just take like not getting any coins or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me too because when you think about game difficulty, you will experience a game in an entirely different way based on somebody who's just like not familiar with video games.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, like a platforming segment for you that might be super simple and super easy. Somebody who doesn't have a grasp on how movement in games works will just fall a million times.
My godbrother told me a story of he was watching his niece and nephew, and he was teaching them how to play like original Mario 1.
Oh no.
And me and him grown up with Mario, like we know to run and jump. It was funny, he said every time they went to a hole, they would stop to like a complete dead stop before him and just try to jump over and over, and
You'll never make
work.
You need the
past
momentum.
the first couple of holes because you need the momentum from running. And it was just funny to like if you've never, because I assume they play games on their phone, but like those don't have like the same sort of thing as like old Mario does, where like you expect, where like if you're presented old Mario having only played like new games, you probably would think to like be as slow and careful as possible and not like think that game would track your momentum and it would be necessary to complete the game.
Yeah, and that goes on to a really big part of accessibility that I wanted to talk about, which is tutorials.
Oh yes.
Like really in-depth tutorials can be really, really important for accessibility in games. Now, I do have a soft spot for games that like teach you by just like making you figure it out. I do like that, but it's definitely doesn't necessarily lead to heavy amounts of accessibility.
It depends on the game.
Yeah.
Mega Man does that in a way with, I'm sure we all have seen the Ego Raptor video by this point, but, it'll introduce a challenge in one room, and then later on in the level, maybe a second time or a third time, it reintroduces that exact same challenge with something different. Maybe there's bottomless pits, or spikes, or more enemies, or different enemies. So it kind of teaches you as you're playing to do a thing, and then you replicate that progressively harder, and then sometimes later on in the game itself you get that exact same challenge but even harder, and that's a fine way. But I'm not trying to jump into like, I don't know, Horizon Zero Dawn with no idea what the hell is happening. It's like, fight this giant metal T-Rex.
Do it. Just fight
just fight it.
Well, that makes me think of like the Zelda formula where it's here's something new, you're gonna use it now.
Right now.
Just use it right now.
I got the boomerang. Okay, hit that.
Yeah, it's when they give you something, they're like, this is how you use it. Do it.
Now.
You need to do it now.
Or you die.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of a game that has a super intuitive, like, tutorial system. I know fighting games are striving really hard more recently to have more in-depth systems to teach people how to play the games because they have such a barrier to entry and a barrier to understanding, like, what you're doing. It's not super simple, and it's different based on what fighting game you're playing. So a lot of them have stepped up their game. Skullgirls originally had a very, very good one.
That's always the example that people tell me is.
It was very
going
good.
through that tutorial was really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you move into newer stuff like obviously the new Mortal Kombat game, and a lot of games will just have like combo trials and all of these things where you not only can unlock stuff by completing them, but also they're supposed to teach you basics of how to play the game.
Mortal Kombat I always thought was good in particular. I'm not super familiar in all fighting games, so I don't know all that do it, but Mortal Kombat actually tells you the frame data, which is huge, I feel, because that could be a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah.
If you have to look that up yourself or like find a good resource that has all the frame data on every move, and Mortal Kombat tells you that.
Yeah, especially, some anime fighters like Guilty Gear, for the most part you have to look that up because I don't think it's presented anywhere in game, and You've seen those wacky animations. You don't know what it ends, and all the data is usually hand compiled by people like manually counting frames. So that's less work for actual players to have to do. It's nice to have a compendium, but yeah, the only problem I have with NetherRealm's presentation of the frame data is that a lot of times it's not accurate.
Is it really?
A lot of times it's not. It'll tell you this move is +6, and you're like, this move is actually 0 on block. Okay.
Yeah, that's more of an issue with the people who are trying to record everything. But
I agree. That's definitely a very good feature, especially for as you get more into like the competitive scene or just trying to get better in general. Just knowing what you have options for it's critical.
And there's small things that I figure out about games through playing them, and that's always kind of cool to get these like information from playing it, where you, as you're playing it, you come to realize like, oh, I can do this, and you discover stuff about the game that you didn't know about. But in-depth tutorials, a lot of people will complain about like, oh, of course I already know how to do this at the beginning of a game, and I do think it's good to have an option to like skip portions, because for players who already know what they're doing, they're like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, I don't want to have to replay the tutorial if I start a new save, you know.
Yeah, so like, but there's always the beginning of a game, like especially shooters, where it's just like,
R2
all right,
shoot.
And they try to include it in like the narrative, where it's like, all right, we're gonna make sure your cognitive functions are all right. Aim up. Aim down. Aim left. Aim right. And it's like, alright, cool. I'm going to have you shoot this target. Okay, now I need you to shoot this moving target. And it's like, they try to make it like narrative, but it's really just, it's a tutorial, and you know it is.
Yeah, Master Chief, we just unfroze you from cryostasis. Alright, put on your helmet. Alright, now run to the left.
I'm ready for this tutorial in Halo Infinite.
Now walk over here. Hey, can you do a jump real quick for me? Oh, yeah.
Looks like your legs are working.
Can you throw me that pop can over there? All right, cool. Your arms haven't rusted.
All right, Master Chief, can you give me a high five? All right, thanks. I just really like it.
Oh. Master Chief suddenly puts his hand on your arm.
you suddenly you realize that you're actually just trapped in a room with a man, and that you're not. It's not a UNSC facility. It's actually just a dude who's just a huge fan of you, and he's just like, hey, can you jump like 5 more times? That'd just be really cool.
And you find out you're not even the real Master Chief.
Master Chef.
Hey, Chief, take off your helmet. Can I see your beautiful lips, Master Chief? Oh, John.
I didn't know this was the dating sim no one asked for.
Oh god, the Microsoft dating sim with all the original Microsoft characters.
I'm romancing Clippy.
I'll date Banjo.
Oh.
All right, we got this. You can take Banjo, I get Kazooie. I'm all about the Briggles.
Dom, revive me. Revive me with your love.
Hurry, Sin Kazooie.
Just revive me with your love.
Where's my wife?
Where's my wife? Doesn't matter, Dom. It's just you and me. Well, so is there any game you can think of that's not a fighting game that has like a super like important and super relevant like introduction that teaches you how to play the game? Because I've had a lot of experiences, especially with like the Total War series or with 4X games, where they have tutorials, but by the time the tutorial ends and I start playing the game, I'm still like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what's happening? I can't tell this. And generally those games will be like, hey, try this faction first. This is the easy faction. Yeah. And they're supposed to be the introductory one that's like the most simple, where their mechanics are most baseline. But sometimes it's still just daunting as hell and you don't know what's happening, and they don't really describe a ton of stuff. Or it's just like walls and walls of text. And it's just like, I don't want to read a paper. Like, I don't want to read this entire like book of information on how to play this friggin' game. I just want to play it.
Did you mean learning to play Civ?
Yeah, the trial by fire thing where you're like, oh fuck the tutorial, I'm just gonna fucking lose.
Basically.
just let me learn. Let me just be sad about it. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to make people learn through failure. I think that that's definitely like a good game design philosophy, is that, you know, some people will go, okay, that kills me. Let's not do it.
Yeah.
But there's a baseline of tutorial that I think games should include to really kind of involve people and get them to figure stuff out, especially people who are new to video games and are like just getting into them.
I remember the Arkham series having a fairly decent tutorial. It would introduce the mechanics for your gadgets when you would get them, and then it would have a small little challenge that was not hard to complete so that you know how to use it. And then it would sometimes give you things like you can also use it for this, like the explosive gel. It told you that you put it on the walls to break walls with weak spots, or you could put it on a wall or the ground, and when an enemy comes by, detonate it, take out the enemy. So, I thought that was always pretty good, and it taught you how to use pretty much all the gadgets, how to fight, how to counter, how to block, dodge, all that stuff. So, it wasn't super, super in-depth, but I felt sufficient enough to teach you the bare minimum of the game.
Yeah, and I've also played through games where it's not that the tutorial wasn't informative, but it was super egregious.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to deal with, it's like a 20-minute tutorial, and it's the intro to the game, and they're like, we weaved it into the narrative, so you can't skip it. And you're like, oh, I hate this.
Yeah.
I just want to do a run-through of this game. I don't want to have to deal with 20 minutes of bullshit.
And, all you have to do is just, start them after that point. You could just have, the intro spawn point be here instead of here.
Well, I remember in the Elder Scrolls series, I would always do the thing where I would just make a save right before it asks you, would you like to finalize all of this at the end of the intro part? And then if I wanted to make a new game, I would just load that.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I don't have to redo the friggin' intro.
Yeah.
Because they always had that intro, especially since they always set up the game to start off with, hey, you're a prisoner.
Hey, you're finally awake.
Yeah.
Thanks for a lot.
And what's funny to me is it went from Morrowind, which was just hey, sign your papers. Okay, thanks. Get off the boat. And that was the beginning of the game. And then you have stuff like Oblivion where it's oh, I'm the king. We need to... why are you in this prison cell? Well, whatever. We need to go through here. I guess we'll let this prisoner just follow us. And then friggin' Skyrim where it's just, oh, I'm a prisoner. Oh, no. It's a dragon.
Oh.
It's the Disco Inferno. Oh, it's Macho Man Randy Savage.
I sure love this Thomas the Tank Engine mod.
Yeah, and then you have to go... And it's funny because that game also did a bad job at conveying to me
everything.
That there was more than one way to go through the tutorial. Because there's the one guy who's come with me into this area. And I was like, okay. And I followed him. And I didn't know you could go join the Stormcloaks.
To be fair, why would you want to?
Yeah, that game was designed to just be wow, both sides suck.
Yeah, which side sucks harder, the racists or the fascists?
Yeah, it was just, this is unfortunate. But, yeah, I do I'm okay with tutorials weaving it into the narrative, but it's definitely something where...
At least make it optional, you know?
If,
especially, maybe not necessarily a new game plus, but, after you beat the game, have, an option of, would you like to replay the tutorial or no?
Yeah.
Or just something.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Definitely if it tracked the first time you played through and it had you do it, and then later on it's oh, it's your second run. Do you want to do this? And you're like, no. I don't want to do this.
Because like you said, I don't want to replay the opening to Skyrim again. I've seen it 500 times. I'm good.
Memes now. You don't need to play it anymore.
In fact, if you've never played Skyrim, you've already seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mechanics that can be learned through tutorials, and then there are tons of mechanics that can't be learned through tutorials that they'll just kind of give to you. A good example is in the Gears of War series. I realized that if you choose to switch your gun while running, you won't swap your gun while running, but if you roll, you'll swap your gun while you're rolling. And if you get into cover, you'll immediately swap the gun. So, I've done it before where I'm moving to a new location and I want to switch out my shotgun for my assault rifle or vice versa or something, and I just roll to swap the weapon, so I'm moving into the new area with the correct weapon. And there's no tutorial that's going to tell you, hey, if you roll, you'll swap while it does it. It's just something you'll learn from playing the game.
Yeah. Or the classic reloading your shotgun, single shell by single shell. Oh no, an enemy. Melee. I can shoot.
Yeah, that's one of those games that, especially if you fuck up your reload, it's no.
Nope.
You're stuck with this. Punishment.
Also known as playing Counter-Strike and using the M249. I sure love belt-fed machine guns. Click.
And there's a lot of games that don't give you information in detail where you have to go seek it or even find it in alternate sources. Like you were talking about, frame data is like that. In some shooters, there's certain things that won't tell you. Like in Gears of War, the different guns have different active reload effects, but they don't say it anywhere that I could see. So I'm like, what the fuck does active reloading this gun do?
You know what? Dragon Ball Fighters. That game pissed me off because I was trying to learn the basic combos, just random, just the default bread and butter combos that weren't the auto combo, and I couldn't do them. I had no idea what was wrong. I talked to Leo, and he's like, yeah, you just do the auto combo in the air. It raises you up. And I'm like, really? That's not said anywhere in the game? Like, you really? No one thought to, like, put this in the... Okay.
Yeah, that was one of those games where I played it a while ago. I don't remember what the tutorial was like, but I just remember I'm not familiar with tag fighters.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with a lot of J fighters. So
Same.
I literally just sat down with it, and I was like... Everybody's like, oh, it's super easy to play, it's super accessible, and you can get into it really easy. And I was like, okay, cool. And I sat down and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah. that was
couldn't get it.
That was my experience, especially because I was like, oh, I'm going to pick Yamcha. Man, I sure wish I knew Yamcha didn't have a down H.
And yeah, so tutorials are super important, and obviously for people who are unfamiliar with video games, they're going to be a really, really important entry point.
I think you can look at Monster Hunter World as a good success point on why accessibility sells, and sells really well, because Monster Hunter has been known to be a very fringe series, but also very complicated.
Yes.
And very high barrier of entry just to understand all the mechanics and get even into the first couple iterations of the feedback loop that game presents. And Monster Hunter World, by streamlining it and having so many QOL quality of life changes across the board, made it one of Capcom, if not one of, it's their most successful game right now.
I think, yeah, the past year or so.
And made it such a success that it is. And it's still, there's no concessions made to the gameplay. It's still all the same.
Yep.
Well, I mean, obviously there's changes in the gameplay, but it's still the core Monster Hunter experience. That has not changed across the generation jump. But so many more people are playing it now, and it shows that if you just make the concessions for these quality of life changes, then it could pay dividends, in how many players see the game, the critical reception of the game. And yeah, game developers should definitely embrace accessibility options.
Yeah, I think getting new players in is the biggest incentive for accessibility, and that's why difficulty tends to be a big hot topic on that stuff, because it's the one where if people come into your game, feel like they can't play it, feel like they can't get through it, they're going to drop it.
They're going to drop it.
And, there are people who are afraid that that's going to ruin the game design and make the game it's not the experience that they want, and that's why I think that options of difficulty is fine.
I think so too. It really doesn't hurt the actual game. Maybe it might take a little bit more development time, but most games nowadays take extra development time anyway. And, personally, one of the big hot topic ones, of course, was Sekiro, being that it's from Software, but hurting that game with an easy mode or a slightly easier difficulty, it wouldn't have. The level design was phenomenal. The architecture and the general graphics of the game were beautiful. What does it change to just have an option to make the bosses slightly easier?
Yeah, those are just number tweaks. You don't need to sure, you might need to tweak its animations and AI, but those are just tweaks that you need to make.
Right.
And as long as you think about it in development, and FromSoft is in very particular because they don't do any difficulty options like that. And I understand that that's Miyazaki's design philosophy, but other game developers have come out in the wake of the Sekiro easy mode discussion of it does not people who make difficult games like Matt Thorson from Celeste and other game designers like Rami Ismail have said that if you aren't developing your games to be accessible to everyone, then that's not a function of difficulty. That's just a function of the game design. You can have both.
Yeah, you can have
Celeste
both.
is a very difficult game with no difficulty options, but just having the assist mode in there makes it easily accessible to anyone who isn't good at a hard indie platformer.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to me, because when I play on a difficulty that's obviously too low, it's boring.
Yeah,
it feels like an empty experience to me. So even if I tried to play on easier modes a lot of the time, I would just not be satisfied with it.
Yeah.
And I'd want to move up to a higher difficulty. Because, again, a lot, being challenged, if that's part of the experience that I want, then I'll choose to be challenged.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, if that's what you want, that's what you're going to do. Like, I remember when I first bought Resident Evil 4 on the PS2, after they added a bunch of the new content, they added a easy mode, because the original one only had normal and professional. And in normal mode, you don't start with anything but the handgun. In easy mode, they start you with the shotgun.
Yeah.
And, the shotgun just alleviates the entire first part of the game,
Yeah.
And you typically don't even get ammo for the weapon until you encounter it, or at least until it's available for sale. So you will automatically now be getting ammo drops for it because it's already in your inventory and you don't have to find it. But I personally never played on easy mode because I tried it out to see what it was like. I said, cool, I start with the shotgun. I'm going back to normal mode now because this is really easy. Especially because the first 3 enemies you can literally just kill with the knife.
I like games. I've seen it a lot from JRPGs nowadays, like Persona, and the last couple Shin Megami Tensei games have done it, where you can actually change the difficulty like during your run.
Yeah.
And you can make it harder if you want. You can make it easier. Most of the times, it's thought of to do it easier. If you do it at a hard difficulty, come across a boss that you think is just a bit too difficult, go down to an easier difficulty. But I would like a lot of games to adopt a just completely scalable difficulty like that.
Yeah, BioWare does it too.
Yeah. That's actually, Sakurai does that in his games that he's made lately, like Smash Ultimate's Classic Mode is based on the same principle that Kid Icarus Uprising's difficulties is that difficulty is a slider, and you can put it at so many points on the slider, and all it does to do hard difficulties is just get more rewards. I'm talking about in Kid Icarus Uprising, though I guess it also applies to Smash too. Get more like loot drops. But if you lose, all it does is just like comes down a bit. It's still like very difficult. I like that it's so customizable. I think customizable difficulty options are very...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good, but I also do like the solid difficulty as well, where you get to... Because there is that level of self-fulfillment where you've run into something that's really difficult and you've failed several times, but you want to really get it and beat it. You want to figure out how you can really do that and get there. And it is a good feeling that you don't want to take away from people. And so like having the adaptable difficulty as like an option, more so than like a cornerstone thing that's exclusively in the game. I do like that. Because I've thought about adaptable difficulty and I do like it. But I definitely don't necessarily think that it should be the mandatory thing.
Well, yeah, all these accessibility suggestions are not like every game needs all of it. Just as a game maker, you should be aware of these tools and these sort of philosophies that you can employ the use of and how they could affect people playing your game and how they feel.
Yeah, because as someone who likes Xcom a lot, Xcom allows you at any point during your campaign to turn on Iron Man. I think that's pretty cool because you can feel like you get to a comfortable place and then have Iron Man on. But also, I've done my own Iron Man runs where essentially I play Iron Man, but I play a version of Iron Man where it's like, well, this game has so much RNG bullshit in it sometimes that like I'll feel like I don't want to have that experience where 3 enemies crit me in a row and I'm just fucked because of it, and then it ruins my whole campaign. Like, I do understand that people want that, and that's why, again, they have the traditional Iron Man mode, but I've enjoyed my own regulated experience of, like, I really like that person, they died, that sucks, but I'm dealing with it. I took these people on a mission, and immediately all of them got crit headshot stuffed, and I was just like, no.
Yeah, it reminds me of playing Diablo 3 on release when they had, those modifiers were brutal. I'll play hardcore mode, it shouldn't be that bad. Run into a legendary. Ah, yes, I see you have teleport, fire chains, and prison. If you don't know what fire chains is, they had, oh my god, and horde. Did you play D3?
I've never played a Diablo game.
So, the horde modifier was, it has extra minions. The fire chains was, each minion and the unique boss, they have chains of fire stretching from them to all of the other ones. And if you go through the chains, you take damage. They had prison, which rooted you in place. And then they had teleport, so they just teleport on top of you. Which usually just meant you get stuck in place, can't move. They teleport on top of you, and then the flame chains just end you immediately.
Yeah. You get deep dish combo mambo.
Yeah, you just walk into a room and you're dead. And you're like, well, that was cool. I guess I gotta build a new character because I was playing on hardcore mode. Nice.
Oh, yeah. Because they do have the permadeath mode.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's actually how I lost my first character. I didn't play hardcore mode after that.
Yeah, developers definitely can and should make these sort of experiences, but they should And they should feel free to both make these experiences, but also like think about the people who maybe don't want these experiences. Like they shouldn't be pressured to not play your game because of the lack of presence of these options.
You shouldn't exclude people by including people.
Yeah.
And so that's really the big thing is options. When you have options, that just includes people.
Yeah. The more options, the more people can enjoy the game. Actually, surprisingly, Payday 2, despite some of their design philosophy, is a good example of that. The guys in charge of Starbreeze Studios, who were the ones who bought Overkill Software, they said that we want to make Payday 2 the Dark Souls of high shooters. And first of all, how many are there for that to matter? But that's another topic entirely. But what they did was they had their default hard mode, which was hard, and then they had Overkill, which was harder than default, and then they made Death, which was even harder than that. They had like all of the cameras and saves were tightened, so you couldn't just like obfuscate them. You had to deal with them. They gave you more enemies with even larger health pools. Your weapons did less damage and a bunch of other shit. And it's like, all right, that's cool, but if I don't want to do that, I can just play on Overkill. If I don't want to do that, I can just play on hard. But if you're the kind of person who wants that challenge, you can play on Death Wish.
Yeah.
And then you get rewards for doing that, and that's fine. But it doesn't really hurt the design of the game to have that in there. If I don't want to deal with unbreakable Titan cameras that I can't just shoot and call it a day, I don't have to.
It's funny to me because the Dark Souls of something has become such a joke and such a meme to the point where when Sekiro came out, I was talking to a group of people and I was like, it doesn't seem to play that much like Dark Souls. It seems to be very unique. And then one person like made a joke about it, everything being like Dark Souls, and I'm like, I'm saying that because it's from the developers
of
and
Dark
then
Souls.
they're like, oh. They thought I was just generically being like, it's not that much like Dark Souls, and just as a basis for games, I guess.
Yeah.
In which, that's the joke of just Dark Souls. It created difficulty. But.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of that trend in games where it's like a popular game comes out and everyone's like, this is the Halo of this genre. It's like, just make your own game.
Well, when you have genre defining.
They do that with movies all the time. The Citizen Kane of.
Oh my God. If I hear that line ever again in my life, I've seen that movie.
Sekiro is the Citizen Kane of Dark Souls.
You know what?
I think more people would say that about Bloodborne.
And that it put me to sleep. Yeah, sure.
Anyways, so I think that's enough, and we should wrap up everything up. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Tora.
Always.
And it's always wonderful to see my co-host, Ali.
Always wonderful to see you.
And I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful night.
Liberate Hong Kong.